What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. In today's video we are checking out two brand new action cameras. We have the Wolfang GA400 and the Wolfang GA320. So same brand but different model numbers. The GA400 is also a bit more expensive, but this one is also waterproof without a case, so you can take it in water just as it is, where with the GA320 you do need a case if you plan on taking it in the water. Alright, so we are going to split this video into three sections. The first section has to do with the internal microphone, so we are going to find out which camera has the better internal microphone. The second section has to do with the image stabilization, so we are going to figure out which camera has the better image stabilization. They can both record the maximum resolution of 4K at 60 frames per second, and they do get image stabilization at that resolution. And of course, the last section has to do with the video quality. So I'm going to show you different recordings at different resolutions, so you can figure out which one has the better video quality. And with that being said, let's begin by checking out a couple of sample recordings so we can see which camera has the better internal microphone. Alright, this is a quick video test indoors between the GA400 and of course the GA320. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course I have the image stabilization enabled for this particular recording. So I am indoors right now, so it should be fairly quiet. The only thing you should hear is my voice and, well, some construction that's going on around here. But yeah, this is how the internal microphones on these two action cameras would capture sound indoors, so in a quiet environment. Okay, so for our second microphone test, I am outdoors. As you can see for yourself, it is a super sunny day, but also a bit windy, so you may hear some wind aside from my voice. For this particular recording, I have the resolution set to 4K at 30 frames per second, and I have the image stabilization enabled on both cameras as well. Let's spin around. So now basically the sun is behind me. So of course most action cameras would struggle under these conditions, mostly if you have the light behind you. So I just wanted to show you how that looks, and also to talk a bit so you can see how the internal microphones on these action cameras capture the sound. So yeah, 4K at 30 frames per second on a super sunny day on the GA400 and of course the GA320. Alright, so after watching those sample recordings, it sounds like the GA320, so the cheaper action camera, gets the better internal microphone because it captures sound better than the GA400. Now, I'm fairly certain that has to do with the fact that the GA400 is a waterproof camera. So the internal microphone has to be covered by something so it can be protected from water, where the GA320 is not a waterproof camera, therefore the microphone inside it doesn't have to be covered by anything. So I'm pretty sure that's why we get better sound from the GA320. But out of the two, yes, the GA320 gets a better internal microphone, basically. Alright, next we're gonna move on and check out some more sample recordings so we can figure out which camera has better image stabilization. And they both support image stabilization at pretty much all resolutions at 30 and 60 frames per second, so even 4K at 60 frames per second, but you don't get that at 120 frames per second. So let's check out some recordings and I'll be right back so we can talk about them. Okay, so for our first test for image stabilization between the GA320 and of course the GA400, I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Obviously I have the image stabilization enabled and I'm walking fairly slow. I'm also trying to keep the cameras as steady as possible. I'm gonna start walking a bit faster now, and eventually we're also gonna be running. So I'm gonna start running now. So yeah, 4K at 30 frames per second with the image stabilization enabled. Okay, for our next test for image stabilization, I have the resolution set to 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course the image stabilization enabled on both cameras. And we're gonna do a bit of running just so you can see how the cameras perform while running. I'm also trying to keep them as steady as possible. So yeah, this is how the image stabilization would work if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second and you're running. I also wanted to show you how the image stabilization would work if you're recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. So as you can see for yourself, I'm walking fairly slow. I'm also trying to keep the cameras as steady as possible, but we're gonna start running in just a second. So let's do a bit of running, see how that works. We'll go right, we'll go left, we'll go right again, left again. So yeah, this is how the image stabilization would work if you're recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. Okay, so after checking out that footage, it's pretty clear that the GA400 gets better stabilization. The videos are steadier. Whenever you're holding the cameras like this, whenever you're walking, whenever you're running, the stabilization from the GA400 is definitely better than the one that we get from the GA320. Now, since this one is a bit cheaper, if you could buy a gimbal for it and turn off the stabilization, maybe you would actually get better footage. But just with the cameras like that, the stabilization is definitely better from the GA400. Next, we're gonna move on and check out some more sample recordings at different resolutions so we can figure out which camera has better video quality. So let's check out those recordings and I will be right back. 4K at 60 frames per second. Okay, we are moving on to another quick recording between the GA320 and of course the GA400. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second and I have the image stabilization enabled on both action cameras. I'm gonna walk straight. I'm trying to keep the cameras as steady as possible. We are basically walking towards the water. And I'm gonna stop here and we're gonna pan left slowly, so kind of towards the sun. So the sun is just above the castle. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second would look like under these conditions. For our next test, I've switched the resolution to 1080p at 60 frames per second. This is a resolution that a lot of people like using. At this resolution, both cameras support image stabilization as well. And of course, I have that enabled as well. We're just gonna walk towards the water here. As you've seen, I just went down some stairs. This will give you an idea of how that stabilization works on each camera. And we're gonna stop somewhere around here. And we're gonna pan right slowly. Beautiful day out today. Also a bit windy, but not in this exact moment. So yeah, 1080p at 60 frames per second on the GA320 and of course the GA400. For our next recording, I've switched the resolution to 1080p at 30 frames per second. Of course, at this resolution, both cameras, so the GA320 and of course the GA400, have image stabilization, and I also have that enabled. I'm just gonna walk slowly this way. I think I'm gonna stop somewhere around here. We'll do a bit of panning to the left. And back right. So 1080p at 30 frames per second. And I also wanted to show you a quick recording in 2.7K at 30 frames per second. Of course, both cameras can do that resolution. And I figured some people may be interested to see how the video recordings look at this particular resolution. So yeah, 2.7K at 30 frames per second, and of course the image stabilization enabled on both cameras, so the GA320 and the GA400. 4K 30 frames per second. Okay, so after checking those sample recordings, it seems to me that the GA400 gets the better video quality. If you look at trees, if you look at the road, if you look at houses, you're gonna notice that everything is a bit sharper from the GA400. Not to mention that when you pair that to the better stabilization, you do get better overall footage. So yes, I do prefer the GA400 over the GA320. So you're probably better off to spend a bit more money and get the GA400 over the GA320, at least in my opinion. Now, if you do have a gimbal, you could also use a gimbal and the GA320, and you're probably gonna get somewhat similar looking footage. Now for nighttime recordings, I am not gonna include any nighttime recordings because no action cameras do great at night, and I'm talking about budget action cameras like these ones, and I'm also including action cameras like GoPros that are about 3 to 4 times more expensive than these ones. So no action cameras do great at night, so you're better off to just use them for daytime recordings. Alright guys, hopefully this video was useful, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.